Hi, good afternoon, all, and welcome to the Black Consciousness Festival's conversation commemorating the International Day of Remembrance of the Victims of Slavery and the Transatlantic Slave Trade. To start this evening's conversation, we welcome Dr. John Hunt to do an opening ritual for us.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you all for being here. Let us begin by setting our hearts, minds, and souls in a state of mindfulness, giving thanks and gratitude for our Creator, whoever he or she may be to each and every one of us, so for all those divine energies that are around us and that are guiding us, for all those forces of nature, guards, our guardians, and our guides who are with us, for those who have the important title of being the first guardians of this space, and first in the Caribbean is the Taino, the Kalinago, and the Siboney. For those ancestors who paved the way for us, those whose energies are represented on the continent, those who did not make it across the waters to this side, those who did make it across, and those who dwell on these lands that we call the Caribbean, we give thanks. All those energies who are elevated with us, all those energies that we come with, and all those energies that we greet you with. We give thanks and we acknowledge them as we start this conversation. Ashe.
Ashe, thank you, John. And now we will have a song from our brother in Brazil, Alabe.
Axé, axé, axé. I'll bring a songs from Oxalá. Oxalá is a Orisha from the day of the Friday, and it represents represents also the peace and also the the Lord of all of the human being, and have a songs that it's in Yoruba. It's a language from the Candomblé. I also speak in Nigeria, in the western part of Nigeria, also Benin, Togo, and parts of Ghana. And he sang songs about uh, the richness of the humankind, and also about our purpose that it's realized in our ori. Ori, it's like our inner head, our spiritual head. The song is called Aure, Aure Boku Shure Ajala, Oji Dayo Olori Ushe, Ero Olori Ushe, Ero Aure, Aure Boku Shure Ajala, Oji Dayo Olori Ushe, Ero Olori Ushe, Ero.
Thank you, Alabe. Thank you so much. That was an excellent addition to the opening of this conversation. And to start this conversation, this special day where we take time out to remember those of our ancestors who went through the terrible institution of slavery and the transatlantic slave trade, which we now acknowledge was basically a movement of human trafficking. I want to start and welcome all the other members of the conversation who will be joining me. Dr. John Hunt and Alabi, who we saw before, Erica, Dawn Marie, Ival, and Whitney. Thank you for all joining us in this most needed and special conversation. Welcome. I want to start today's conversation with a quote from Nelson Mandela that says, "I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear." And In that quotation, some of the key words are courage, triumph, bravery, and of course, conquering fear. But what exactly is it that we talk about when we talk about having to conquer and fear? An excerpt from the National Museums of Liverpool. Really interesting description about, what was slavery and the transatlantic slave trade. Says that between about 1500 and 1900, Europeans forcibly uprooted millions of people from throughout West Africa and West Central Africa and shipped them across the Atlantic in conditions of great cruelty. To refer to the Africans who were enslaved as only quote unquote slaves strips them of their identity. They were, for instance, farmers, merchants, priests, soldiers, goldsmiths, and musicians. They were husbands and wives, fathers and mothers, sons and daughters. They could be Yoruba, Igbo, Akan, or Congolese. European slavers dispersed them across the Americas to lead lives of degradation and brutality without thought for their personal lives. Millions died in the process. As a result, people of African descent are spread throughout the Americas and Western Europe. This is called the African diaspora. I want to welcome you again as all members of the African diaspora on this day when we are called to celebrate, commemorate, and you might ask, celebrate what? Celebrate the fact that we are here, that we are still here, despite everything that we just heard describing this process. So I want to open the conversation by asking if there's anybody who would like to share a piece of reading, poetry, anything that was significant to them to start off, and then we'll jump into the conversation. No pressure. It's voluntary. Anybody? No.
I have a piece, if nobody's going to go, that I could
Great.
start with from the Book of Negroes.
Lovely. Thank you, Erica.
And I'll just read, from the start, a little bit of it. And now I am old, London, 1802. I seem to have trouble dying. By all rights, I should not have lived this long. But I can still smell trouble riding on any wind just as surely as I could tell you whether it is a stew of chicken necks or pig's feet bubbling in the iron pot on the fire. And my ears still work just as good as a hound dog's. People assume that just because you don't stand as straight as a sapling, you're deaf, or that your mind is like pumpkin mush. The other day, when I was being led into a meeting with a bishop, one of the society ladies told another, "We must get this woman into parliament soon. Who knows how much longer she'll be with us?" Half bent though I was, I dug my fingers into her ribs. She let out a shriek and spun around to face me. "Careful," I told her. "I may outlast you." There must be a reason why I have lived in all these lands, survived all those water crossings, while others fell from bullets or shut their eyes and simply willed their lives to end. In the earliest days when I was free and knew nothing other, I used to sneak outside our walled compound, climb straight up the acacia tree while balancing Father's Quran on my head, sit way out on a branch and wonder how I might one day unlock all the mysteries contained in the book. Feet swinging beneath me, I would put down the book, the only one I had ever seen in bio, and looked out at the patchwork of mud walls and thatched coverings. People were always on the move. Women carrying water from the river, men working iron in the fires, boys returning triumphant from the forest with snared porcupines. It's a lot of work extracting meat from a porcupine, but if they had no other pressing chores, they would do it anyway. Removing the quills, skinning the animal, slicing out the innards, practicing with their sharp knives on the pathetic little carcass. In those days, I felt free and happy, and the very idea of safety never intruded on my thoughts. I have escaped violent endings even as they have surrounded me, but I never had the privilege of holding on to my children, living with them, raising them the way my own parents raised me for 10 or 11 years until all of our lives were torn asunder. I never managed to keep my own children long, which explains why they are not here with me now, making my meals, adding straw to my bedding, bringing me a cape to hold off the cold, sitting with me by the fire with the knowledge that they emerged from my loins and that our shared moments had grown like corn stalks in damp soils. Others take care of me now, and that's a fine thing. But it's not the same as having one's own flesh and blood to cradle one toward the grave. I long to hold my own children and their children if they exist. And I miss them the way I'd miss limbs from my own body. The Book of Negroes.
Thank you, Erica. One of the things that comes up several times in that excerpt from the Book of Negroes is this idea of memory and remembrance, which connects to the quote that we actually use on our social media posts today, that slavery is a memory of something that we cannot remember and yet something we cannot forget. I would like to ask everybody here in the conversation, what does that mean to you? What does that the idea of memory and remembering mean to you in this context of the experiences of our ancestors, the experiences of the past that are still connected to what we live today? So feel free to jump in. Well, they don't want me to call names like we in school, right?
No, I'm ready. I'm ready, Sean. I'm ready. I'm ready. Um, when I think about that, when I think about the phrase, I think about the idea of remembering that it's not a segment in time that happened and now it's past an entire, not even one, many different cultures and experiences were born of that moment. Like I am not who I am. I am who I am because of that. Like being Trinidadian, what did that mean had that not happened? Being American, what did that mean? Like all of the conversations I have with my friends within the diaspora, it's always these conversations of like, well, who am I? Like, who are we? We have these surface level identities, but then what? What goes on beyond that?
Mm-hmm.
I was listening to a podcast the other day and they were discussing the ease or the not even the ease, the argument behind proving your humanity to people
Mm-hmm.
and why we have to do that. And they said that no one has to prove, this is Dr. Yaba, I believe, Yaba Blay.
Mm-hmm.
No one has to prove the humanity of an animal. You hit the puppy and everybody responds in the same way. But for some reason, Black people are constantly trying to explain our humanity. And it goes, and when you have to do that, it is exactly what the phrase is. It's a memory of something we can't remember, but we can't forget. I didn't experience it. I lived my life vastly different than an enslaved person, but
Mm-hmm.
yet still with the remnants and the residue of it that you can't afford to forget. And it's for me it's infuriating. I
Mm-hmm.
spend a lot of time being incredibly angry and frustrated and triggered
Yeah.
about the fact that I can't just forget. I don't have the luxury or privilege of doing that.
Yeah, thank you for that, Whitney. And it connects to something we were talking about earlier today in the book Silencing the Past by Trio, when he talks about the Haitian Revolution and why it's been so hidden in most of the history texts of the world that talk about all the other revolutions at the time, the American and French, etc. Part of the mindset that created that is this sense that for the West, the Haitian Revolution was and still is unthinkable. It's like, how could those people who are not even human do that? You know? So I totally understand what you're saying. Anyone else wants to jump in? Thoughts?
Infuriation, yes. There's definitely days when I try not to remember because I don't want to be angry. But I'm sure, we've all heard this saying, that we are the dream of our ancestors. We are their joy. And I can't even imagine what it was like in that period of time as you're going on this journey where you don't know where you're going to end up, but your assumption, I am assuming for them, right? That your assumption is that you were going to a better place, or that a bright and hopeful place, right? That your destination had to be as dark as the experience that you were currently having. But in that moment, did they think the future could be bright? And then after arriving, seeing what was going on, was there this dream at night that there would be better? And I think today we are a part of that dream. So that's what I try to remind myself of, that if I could go back and meet an individual from 400 years ago or 500 years ago, would they be happy with me? And would they be happy with the fact that I could live as I am living currently? I think sometimes we may look at the current day and we may be pessimistic, or we may feel like, we have so much further to go, which is true. But when we compare, and we shouldn't have to, but if we do compare it to that day or those days, it is way better. At least the daily living is better. In some ways it's not, right? But in many ways it is. And I actually have this poem here, Ain't I a Woman, by Sojourner Truth. And I'll just say a portion of it. That man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me any best place. And ain't I a woman? Look at me. Look at my arm. I have plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could head me. And ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as a man when I could get it, and bear the lashes well. And ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children and seen most of all sold off to slavery. And when I cried out with my mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman? Then they talk about this sting in the head. What's this they call it? Members of the audience whispers, intellect. Oh, that's it, honey. What's that got to do with women's rights or Negroes' rights? If my cup won't hold but a pint and yours holds a quart, wouldn't you be mean not to let me have my little half measure full? Then that little man in black there, he says, women can't have as much rights as men because Christ wasn't a woman. Where did your Christ come from? Where did your Christ come from? From God and a woman? Man had nothing to do with him. If the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, these women together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. And now they is asking to do it. The men better let them. Obliged to you for hearing me. And now old Sojourner ain't got nothing more to say.
Wow. That is powerful. That's really, really powerful.
Very
But
powerful.
I've connected to, the things that you were talking about, the realities. I just wanted to share something small
Mm-hmm.
between from actually the Liverpool museums, which is interesting because that was one of the centers of the transatlantic slave trade or human trafficking. In this particular section, they talk about the conditions that Africans had to live and people of African descent had to live in under slavery. In the Caribbean, many plantations held 150 slaves or more. In terms of mortality in the Caribbean, Dutch Guyana, and Brazil, the slave death rate was so high and the birth rate so low that they could not sustain their population without importations from Africa. Rates of natural decrease ran as high as 5% a year, and life expectancies were usually no more than 35. Living conditions in order to ensure the profitability of slaves and not and to produce maximum quote unquote return on investment, slave owners generally supplied only the minimum food and shelter needed for survival and forced their slaves to work from sunrise to sunset, sometimes 16-hour days. Although young adult men had the highest expected levels of output, young adult women had value over and above their ability to work in the fields. They were able to have children who, by law, were also slaves of the owner of the mother, and therefore the average price of female slaves was higher than their male counterparts up to puberty age. Men around the age of 25 were the most valuable. These are the kinds of things that our ancestors lived through and endured. So, John, Dawn Marie, Alabi, Erica, let's hear your thoughts on the importance or how you see memory and remembering these things, even though we didn't live through it.
I mean, I think you've harped on an interesting dilemma in the quote where it's not part of our human conditioning to remember hurtful things, right? So even in our own present existence, we don't have a strong memory of the things that were painful. We always hold on. We are conditioned to hold on to those things very good. So I mean, if you're going to imagine generations upon generations of atrocities that have happened to people, and how when we talk about post-traumatic and slave syndrome, the notion of in our DNA carries this information. How then are we going to come to face that, except through the information that comes in the memories we can't remember? And I'm always intrigued by the thought from a spiritual perspective of if an ancestor wanted to connect with us, they would want us to remember them. And one of our dilemmas then is how to remember people and face the trauma that they went through, because it's their survival of that trauma that caused us to be here. But for us to relive that trauma, for us to really embrace how unbearable it was, how atrocious it was, and how long it persisted, you
Mhm.
know, you're talking about abuse, you're talking about rape, you're talking about a system that dehumanized uh, our people, and yet, like you said, and yet we're here. In order for us to celebrate their lives, we have to really face the unbearable, uncomfortable,
Mhm.
atrocities, and find a way to get to the other side. I mean, we've been trying to dance around the idea of there must have been something good,
Mhm.
but some of our ancestors couldn't even remember their rituals because
Mhm.
they were so abused. They couldn't even do their rituals um, to sustain their lives. So at death, they would not have been able to do the rituals to ensure their safe passage to the next world. So you're talking about an insurmountable, almost right, impossible sense of lament that
Mhm.
we have been conditioned to think. So no wonder if there's a case of dysphoria or disconnect or or schizophrenia. No wonder it would exist in our generations even to this day, because we
Mhm.
have not been given the tools, or we have not been given the space to face what we have, and we're not encouraged by our contemporaries. We're
Right.
asked to put it aside. That was then. And I think that maybe this call to remember what we cannot remember is a
Mhm.
call for us to turn and face, you know, what happened, so that we can begin to acknowledge and celebrate those people from whom we've come.
Right. I like that. Turn and face what happened, and that directly connects to this year's theme, right? Stories of courage, encouraging us to pay attention to go and seek and actively reach out for those stories that exist. They exist, or sometimes, you mentioned spirituality and connecting with ancestors. Sometimes they come to us in the most unusual of ways, right? So thank you for reminding us of that and about the importance of facing the unbearable, because a lot of it is not, a lot of people don't want to face, some of these, some of these realities. I mean, when you think about the transatlantic slave trade, as it's called, as though it's trading in objects, even though it was basically human trafficking, and you learn some of the data behind it, the number of European countries that were actively involved in it, it's staggering. But let me not continue. Dawn, Alabi, Erica, let's hear from you.
Hi, yes.
Hmm.
No, I definitely agree. I see that, this is something that we have definitely forgotten in terms of our identity. We have lost a really big part of our foundation, our historical foundation, that is. But when you look at it, it's really not something that you can forget, because it's always so, it's integrated into real life. It's you see it every day. You see how dynamics work between races. You see how everything isn't really aligned, you know um a lot of people really need to face the facts, and with that you could see that they definitely have no choice. It's inevitable that you're going to see all of the products of this slave trade, slavery in its entirety. It has affected our psyche. It has affected our behavior. It has affected the way that we interact with different people. How, sometimes you are very, unconsciously wary when you're in certain situations. All of these things have really been stemmed into that time, that era where we were all in a sense of disillusionment, this time where we really lost ourselves. But even with that, we created an identity right now that isn't as conscious as it should have been. We definitely have this mentality where we don't really feel comfortable in who we are because of this past.
Hmm.
We definitely we feel wary to be black, we feel wary to be African. We try to change so many things to fit in, to integrate with everybody else. And I guess I'm guessing that that's something that would have to deal with the fact that you have this preconceived notion that you're savage, because you've been taught that all your life. But it's really something you can't forget. It's something that it affects you every day.
Hmm.
So you get where I'm coming from. It
Yeah.
really,
Definitely, definitely, and that word that you use a couple of times, "wary," I think is, connects to stuff that everybody's said so far. That it's, and I've heard many other people talk about it being tiring to always kind of have to fight against, things that continually seek to either dehumanize us or call us, not human enough, etc. But Erica, Alabi, let's hear from you.
I'm thinking
Um,
of the Cicely Tyson quote that I saw
Hmm.
yesterday.
Yes. Yes.
Turning a blind eye to our history has not saved us from its consequences.
Correct.
And
um,
when I saw that, I was reminded, because for many years I find the whole thing very painful. And
Mhm.
Shona and I have talked about that. Um, when you read about it, you try to imagine, you feel it. And I understand the need to kind of get away from it. But at the same time, there's a responsibility, if it is we're going to be our fullest selves to get into this thing. And as John say, turn and face it, because it is through the darkness, embracing the darkness and embracing all of that, because darkness is good, right? Building on what we have talked about before,
Mhm.
we can get through to the light. So it's embracing all of who we are, the pain, the joy also, because that is what comes a lot for me, the joy. Even in all of the pain, there was joy, there was aliveness. So I think somewhere in there we have to find the courage, the
Mhm.
strength, the fortitude to face, to own, to be honest, to not pretend that history is in the past, because we know history is not in the past. If we think that there is no past or future, there is only now, it is with us, because we're seeing the consequences of all of these things. We dealing with them, how we feel sometimes, the tiredness that comes. and yet knowing that we have to continue. So I like John's point and Donnery's. We just have to turn toward it, embrace the darkness, work through it. And for me, it's about with the collective. It's not
Hmm.
an individual thing. We
Yes.
have to work it in the collective, tapping into our spirituality, those things which we still have.
Hmm.
Our bush, our medicine, our words, our elders, tapping into that because I believe intrinsically we have everything we need to begin
Uh,
that work, which is so important. Yeah.
Yes. Yes,
uh,
Alobe.
Hallelujah.
Tell us.
I know that I quite disadvantage here because it's not my language here.
Nah, you're fine.
But I gonna try. What I think about that, I can dialogue with all of Erica said. Also, Whitney was
Hmm.
very strong. What Whitney said, and Don Maria Alexander. Uh, we are the future of the past. Né? I'm from Brazil, but all of we are no nationality. We don't have that. Simply uh, they took us and bring it to this continent and all of the mistakes that we know, but we were very 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 resistant, and sometimes I do some calculus about how they did that in Brazil. Like one in Brazil, they arrived here in one in the 16th century, 1500, and in the end of the century, all have already a quilombo or a place of resistance with 30,000 of Africans that they not try, they did another another country, another place, for they do all of the things with autonomy, and they all negotiate all of this kind of thing, and did and try to transfer their institution from Africa, mainly from Congo and Angola, because it was the majority of Africans that came from the first moment from the Africa was from Congo and Angola, and also was to the Tobago, Jamaica, USA, was to Barbados, or was to Suriname, also to Brazil. Was the majority came from there, and they made all of the institutions that sometimes we forget that here in Brazil, our Portuguese, our Portuguese, it is a quite of Bantuism, have a quite of Bantuism, like because you don't speak Portuguese, but this we call chicks, that in Portuguese, for us in Brazilian Portuguese we call bochecha, like it's an African word for that. Also, it's an African word, queixo. Also, for that, for tits, like tits, also is an African word. For belly, also is an African word.
Wow.
So I have many kind of things. Even was calling like Benjamin, also
Hmm.
it's African words like caçula, and,
Hmm.
and like it's a kind of that colonize, like the Bantus colonize the Brazilian Portuguese,
Hmm.
have this kind of a way. So it's a linguistic influence and resistance.
Hmm.
And also we had like the capoeira. Like capoeira, it's a quite of resistance, that is it's a quite of dance or fight. So that we use our body as as weapon, and also a way for we keep our body spiritually
Mm-hmm.
and integrate. So also this are kind of thing have some names
Mm-hmm.
interesting, like of resistance here in Brazil, that we call that only in African languages. So
Right.
this also like I know that the slavery try to stop us to think in the future, try to us to stop to have some ambitions, but sometimes they don't tell the whole history that existed in in that. It's not
Mm-hmm.
only quilombos, also have the people inside the like White House or the big house,
Mm-hmm.
also it is contributed for the quilombo exist, like the whole of the fugitives. It is a very interesting whole, like the
Mm-hmm.
fugitives. It's a kind of communication how the strategy can do, like here in Brazil they discovered that some events that happen in Caribbean, like in the Asian
Mm-hmm.
revolution,
Haitian
also
Revolution, yeah.
influenced the how Brazilians organize themselves. But it's not Brazilians like the African in Brazil organize themselves. But
Mm-hmm.
also have some studies that show that even the Haitian they discover about the influence of the Palmares Quilombo
Right.
fight how to organize themselves. So it's we are we are the results of all of these kinds of the past, and also we are the future, and we have to have a quite of positive
Mm-hmm.
uh, positive knowledge about that. Like we are now the past of the next future,
Right.
how we construct all of that, how we
Mm-hmm.
construct the unity. For me, it's very important to speak or to talk with some people that from Caribbean that have the same color skin or with me. Someone have light skin or they have dark skin, but this don't matter.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is what we stay doing now for change the words that the history that like the white man, and I can say also, I can say again, the white man try to disturb or interrupt a quite our way to carry our history,
Mm-hmm.
like, and also like we can think like about Afrofuturism. The Afrofuturism is not is a quite of the past of the past. What
Mm-hmm.
we think the past of the past? How was our past before the slavery?
Right.
How was our greatness?
Mm-hmm.
And about that, that we construct our future. Because of that, that we have to bring the strong of our ancestors. Our ancestor is like the past of the past, and that's we go to the future. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's like that that I can bring to us now. I expect that you understand me.
Of course, we understood.
Okay.
And
Very
Alabama,
They are
well.
the best of the best. Oh my
right?
God.
Alabama, the amount of things that you packed into there. I mean, yeah, but I mean, just to kind of summarize, you talked about and connecting to what Erica said before you about the fact that in spite of the tremendous amount of difficulty and hardship and brutality and violence that happened over these 500 years when slavery was an institution in the Americas, there still is a lot for us to unpack and investigate and research to see that in the midst of all of that, the humanity of our ancestors persisted. They persisted to use their words that are now a huge part of Brazilian Portuguese and make it very different from the Portuguese in Portugal. And likewise for all the other languages that are spoken in the Americas, whether it be English, Dutch, French, Spanish, all of these European languages as spoken in the Americas are not the same as their European antecedents because they have been modified, changed, influenced by our African ancestors. You talked about not telling the whole story, and that is also important and connected to the theme of this year, stories of courage. We can't wait for them to tell the stories. We have to find the stories and make sure that they pass on to future generations, and that what we do now affects the history to come. I mean, that is absolutely clear. I want to move on. So we talked about memory and remembrance. I want to move on to two things that Alabe raised: resistance and unity. And how do we see that playing into remembrance? How do resistance and unity play an integral part in us continuing to not forget what happened in the past? Anybody jump in?
I mean, I think
I see John itching up there to say something.
oh, let him go, let him go, let him go.
Go
Tell
ahead.
us.
Go ahead.
Ival, he bows to the lady. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you, John. No, as I was, you mentioned resistance and how resistance plays out, and it can look, it can have so many faces, right? I think resistance can show up in how we show up, right? So I was having a conversation today with a teacher, right? And she was talking to me about a young lady in her class, a student, and how bright she is, how brilliant she is. She actually said she's a gifted learner, right? And on a scale of 1 to 100, her grade in the class is 100.
Wow.
Right? And so I said to her, I said, well, we're not striving for perfection. What we're striving for is the highest level of comfort in who she is and who she represents, which are many, many people who came before her. I said, so as long as she's comfortable in that place, the 100 is just gravy. And the reason why I said that was to resist the fact that the 100 means, oh, she's perfect. No, the 100 doesn't mean she's perfect. The 100 comes from you. That's your grading system, right? And so, yes, she got the correct marks on the exam and all of that. But who is she as an individual? And I want to make sure that you are clear, teacher, instructor, right? That the scale that I'm using is not your scale. So I'm happy that you gave her the 100. But just know that, yes, she's talkative in your class, and that I don't have a problem with that. I want her to be talkative because I want her to be comfortable, and I want her to show up, and I don't want her to feel like she has to hide her brilliance. And the only place her brilliance can show up is on the exam that you are going to score.
Right.
And so that is a form of resistance. Resisting the scale that's being used to grade us or to say how good we are or to say what beauty looks like. No, I'm going to resist your scale and your standards. And even though we know sometimes we try to fit in with those standards because realistically, we do want to fit in, right? And we want to progress based on the contemporary of definition of what progress is. But even in the midst of that, as Alabe said, even in the midst of that, I'm going to put my own twist on it. Right? So I'm going to progress in your school system, but as a person, you're going to have to see me.
Yeah. Ivo, thank you for that. And I think it's important to highlight that, what you were talking about and all of these skills and standards that are kind of imposed on us have a history, yeah? Because remember, we were products to be bought. We were, objects that you had to get a return on investment. And so that has a history.
Yes.
That system of setting up standards and setting up skills for us to be measured by has a history. It doesn't come out of nowhere. You know, it has a very long history that obviously still continues today. Anybody else? Resistance and unity, and how you see that connecting to the importance of memory and remembrance.
Is John
Well,
going? Okay.
Yes.
you want me to go? Well, I'm a performer. I'm a performing artist also as my foundation, and
John,
to
tell
me,
us what kind of art now?
I love dance. I'm a dancer,
Thank you, John.
and there's nothing more rebellious and revolution than a sweet, sweet wine in a masquerade. Because there's a way in which it just goes against all of the Eurocentric sensibilities that we have functioned, and yet it persists. Carnival persists, masquerade practices persist.
Mhm.
Even when they get taken out of their original um, meanings, they turn up in dance hall, they turn up in many different spaces, and they show up more or less almost intact. Even if it's modified, you can still see the centers of it. So
Mhm.
to me, I think there's a way in which we celebrate in our bodies and the embodying and embracing that energy that
Yes.
that we connect to, and it resonates with us, and it almost hits us as at an instinctive level. So even before we can cognitively know that we shouldn't do it, we're doing it. And to my mind, these are things that we need to turn our attention to rather than to suppress or take our away from, and actually try to really focus on the why. If you think about ritual, if you think about processions in the way that they were done on the continent, and how we continue to process in masquerade, or we continue to process in the ways that we do, and even intuitively we take on feathers, we take up beads, we take up various aspects, libations or smoke or whatever, and we think we're doing it because it's appealing, but there's another layer of information that we are grappling with, or we're struggling to connect with or resonate with, and that's in moving our spines and our waists. That whole notion of of generating energy and regenerating energy and reviving and moving as a community. I mean, I think it's truly a revolution.
Nice. Thank
I
you.
It
totally
is.
agree. Totally agree.
And I also think it's in terms of us being able to heal ourselves, that gyration, that moving, and it's not vulgar as they would want us to think,
Hmm.
you know. So Whitney, I jumped ahead of you.
No, I was just I
You like the wine and talk. Okay, good, no problem.
well, let's not forget where I've been living for the past 3 years, okay? Like, let's forget that I am literally living in the white motherland. Like it is every day such an aggressive reality for me that I feel dry. Like it that dehydration that you feel? Like I feel like the spirit is being sucked out of me sometimes. And what Juan was saying reminded me of a conversation. Again, I'm living in the whitest country I've ever lived in my entire life, working in the whitest building I've ever worked in my entire life. It is it's an aggressive experience. And I'm listening to my colleagues, and I work in education, I work amongst educators, so that's always a really shocking experience as well, listening to them speak. And you're responsible for facilitating learning and shaping young minds, but that's another conversation for another day. They were talking casually about a dance class that one of my colleagues took, hip hop, and I stopped because I wanted to listen. And she acknowledged and admired the fact that the technicality of dance doesn't matter. It's the spirit inside of it, right?
Hmm.
And the people she was admiring in the chorus, and what she sees online, are obviously people of color. And I had to share. I was saying, like, in Trinidad, and in other places, we play music in the streets just organically. It's not even like intentional, it just happens. It's not this silence, this rigidity that happens. It's literally music just pumping and just
Mhm.
vibrating through the streets and through your body to the point where it impacts the way Black people walk, the way we walk. You can't even embody that. Just us getting from point A to point B has so much swag. I can only imagine how infuriating that must be to not even be able to get that much of it. But
They have
here,
to walk and whine like that.
well, they're talking. She was talking about how she's like, oh, the dancing and the moving, how different it felt from her normal rigid walk, and I'm laughing to myself because I'm like, that's not a problem I have. Not only is it not a problem I have, it's a problem I don't have that other people admire. They say it. Whitney, the way you move through the hallways, the way you walk, and I'm like, no, you're welcome. So I loved what John was saying about the gyration and the movement of energy and what that means for us and how that in and of itself is resistance. All the
Consistent.
things that the people who have gone out of their way and spent their lives in their history, this is their history too, trying to oppress, trying to commodify, trying to steal and
Mhm.
colonize. They still can't get it. They still can't get it. Look at us. They still can't
And
get
what you
it.
said, yeah, what you said is really important with me because it was one of the key things that was prohibited in most colonies, that you could not dance, you could not play music, you could not celebrate
Kitten
religious
drum.
rituals. Those were some of the, yeah, those were some of the key things that were legislated, were put into law that our ancestors could not do because they understood the power of it. Erica, you were gonna jump in.
Yeah, because I was thinking in terms of, the movement and the acts of resistance. I'm also thinking in terms of how, we hid our religion, even as they try to take things away from us, we hid it within, so we have all of the forms we have now, Yorisha, Candomblé, the full range,
Yeah.
spiritual Baptist, all of it, because we hid who we are in there, putting
Yes.
whatever face on it. We resisted in that way.
Hmm.
We also, for me, resistance comes up too. I'm talking about that in terms of our ancestors. But, one of the things I have a challenge with is some of the terminology used by these UN agencies, the idea of victims.
Right.
I am like, really? I was like, really, boy, victims? We are not victims. Something happened to us, these people perpetrated, but victims for me imply a kind of, you can't
Helplessness.
help yourself.
I'm
And
sorry.
we are not that.
They're calling
The
enslaved people
victims of
victims
slave
of
trade,
slavery.
that's the thing that the
So
UN
what
did.
do they call the
Yeah,
white people
the
who were
day.
involved in it? Do they
I
consider
That's a good
Well,
question.
that's a good
But the
question
title,
with me.
yeah,
Yeah.
the title of the day, Whitney, is the International Day of Remembrance of the Victims of Slavery and the Transatlantic Slave Trade. And this
Yes.
is
I
the
have
name
problem with the
coined
word victims.
by the
yeah.
I,
UN, yeah.
I also have a resistance to who is saying the day because these same institutions which declaring these days for us to think are the same ones who are part of that system which benefited from the whole human trafficking across the Atlantic. So
Of
That's
course.
again, for me, I never paid attention to these days because of that resistance. I understand now with a little more maturity, it's a time for us to sit and honor. But
Hmm.
for me, that's the resistance in there. The same people giving this to us as if we should be grateful. Like, is that part of the narrative? Is that part of the continuing spiral that we're supposed to be on? What is this? So I resist that too. And then this thing about against, to me, anytime you're against something, you're giving more life to it. So this against
Hmm.
racism, what are we working for and toward?
Hmm.
So those are my other, some of the other things I have
it's language.
resistant things around.
Well, Whitney,
Resistance through
you
language.
know where I stand with language, Whitney. I
Yeah.
mean, just earlier this week, Erica and I were blowing our tops off because there's a new hotel in town, right, in Trinidad, and when there's anything new in Trinidad, everybody has to sample it. And But the hotel's name, interestingly, an article was done in one of the national newspapers, the Newsday, about the hotel. And, it was kind of saying that the hotel is connecting to the historical legacy of the country and whatnot. And, proudly kind of featuring the names of the different parts of the hotel. First of all, and I'm not going to take too much time because I want to hear from all you. The name of the hotel is The Bricks, Brix.
The bricks.
Bricks, Brix. And the word bricks, for those who don't know out there, is a measure, a unit to measure sugarcane, to measure sugar, sorry, the product of sugarcane. That's part one. It gets better. The name of the restaurant is The Exchange. It gets better. The name of the deli is Merchants. And the name of the rooftop lounge is Sugar High. And they talk about it being a nod to the sugar industry that was the foundation of this country. And I'm like,
Why are
And
we
not only
going
the
to
foundation, the
It's a
prosperity that it
plantation.
came to the country. Exactly.
Here in Brazil, the emblem of the policy is the sugar,
mhm,
the sugar cane here, and also
mhm,
the coffee.
right,
Uh, until today, like they was created for like defend the private
the,
property of the slavery, and until
right,
today this exists here, like and when we see the index, like the high index of the murders of the black people here, like in Brazil it is incredible big, like it's a quantity of 5,000 black people dying by weapon any each year,
wow,
like and this was this is increasing. I don't know what we can do to stop that. It's not only one kind of things like to
mhm,
stop it to kill us, stop it to murder us. Black lives matter. Like like 10 years 10 years ago was 35,000. Now it's 50 50
55,000 or 50,000.
50,000.
Mm-hmm,
So like in the next 10 years, how that will be, like
mm-hmm. And those numbers.
what kind of things that we can do, like and even today we can see the emblem, and
Right.
nobody say it's a kind of a problem, but we know that why they was create, like the meeting.
Mhm,
I think
mhm,
that, like that, the meeting like we doing now, like that,
mhm,
this kind that we speak how the impact of the white people, or the racism in our
mm,
society.
right.
I can understand that they also they also we do a kind of these things to plan something. We
Ala-
plan like
Alabama is a conspiracy theory. Alabama say they come together in meetings to discuss
no,
how to deal with us.
no.
But you're
You
probably right,
understand?
Alabama.
We plan to stop. Have somebody that like with this kind of index, like
Mhm,
70%. 70% of the people that die by weapon
mhm,
fire weapons, like it's too much,
mhm.
like 70% of the woman that die with childbirth,
It's
it's
just
black,
too much.
it's black
It's too
woman,
much.
it's too
It's just
much, like
simply too much.
it's a
And
kind of planning, like
they
have
are
something but here in Brazil, unfortunately, don't
Mhm.
have no Malcolm X here, like that will speak straight the problem, like we accuse some people, like
But Alabe,
you do
don't
those
say
kind of
it.
things.
They have no Malcolm X. There's no Malcolm X yet. They have people like you and others who are coming
No,
up in the system
I
that are going to become the
Radicalizes.
Malcolm X's of
Radicalizes,
Brazil.
Sean. Radicalizes.
Correct.
I don't have bodyguards. Don't have.
Not yet.
You
Not
know,
yet.
you
We will
understand?
organize the bodyguards first.
You
Not
know
yet.
what happened with Marielle Franco.
Yes.
I knew her. Marielle Franco. It's like uh, how
She
can I
was
say that in
an
English?
activist. Yeah, she was an activist and
No, but she had
deputy
yeah,
politician.
yeah, yes,
Mm-hmm.
police deputy,
Mm-hmm.
and I know her. I discussed with her before, like about this kind of index,
Right.
and she said, no, but I have to speak, I have to do like that, but it's very, 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 very dangerous.
Of
Like
course. Well,
we don't have a bodyguard, and what she was doing when she was dying like that.
hmm
Not everybody know about what happened, but
well, yeah.
she
What happened
assumed.
is she became a symbol of the movement, right? She became a symbol of
Yes,
what
but
happened.
but have a specificities that
Uh-huh.
she was in charge to
Right.
uh to identify
hmm
who is the like the policemen and the
Right.
officer and the commander that say why the black people is dying.
Right.
She is very
So
courageous,
she was gonna
but she not
investigate the
bodyguard.
yeah, but she doesn't
And
have
the people that the people
shot her.
shot her.
Yeah, murdered her in
Understand
cold
what I
blood.
mean? So was very it's very upset
Of
this kind
course.
of thing, it is difficult. Like if
Well,
you
they killed they killed
this
Martin Luther King as well, and I mean, there's a
yeah
long list of
have
black
a long list.
leaders
And
Yes,
if we're
who were
talking
fighting.
courage and resistance, I
yeah,
think that's part of the, you know, you don't set
That
out
is
to
part
get
of the
killed,
course.
but understand that once you're going against the grain or you're going to be speaking up, you could
mhm.
die before you die, right? All kinds of things could happen. So, how do
Yeah.
we live?
Wow.
Whitney,
Whitney, you're
you're
on
not
mute.
muted.
Thanks. I was saying, let's not forget that they are meeting and discussing the proverbial they, our livelihoods and what's going to happen to us. It's not a conspiracy. It's called government. It's politics. Like it's
Yes.
not a
Yep,
secret.
that's what I was going to say too.
And to go back to that hotel situation, that sounds like to me uneducated people making choices, right? And not uneducated in the sense of like elitism or
Mm-hmm.
class, but like really our information is so buried, like what we were talking about the revolution in Haiti and how deeply covered it
Mhm.
was. I couldn't get that information unless I went to an all black college. That's how I got the information. I paid
Yeah.
for that information. And not a lot of
Yes.
people pay for that information. Not a lot of people know that they can pay for that information.
Mm-hmm.
Not a lot of people know that we shouldn't have to pay for that information. So I'm not surprised that it happened. It happened. It happens all the time where in an effort to connect and an effort to honor, we end up doing the dance and doing the thing that perpetuates the
hmm
problem and
hmm
doesn't provide that resistance. It ends up providing like a really soft place for other people to land and not feel so bad. Well, you've gotten over it, so we can move on, right? Like,
No,
But you
no.
know, Whitney, the interesting thing is if that was actually a discussion, like if people actually knew what these terms meant and were putting up a fight and saying X, Y, and Z, and then there was a pushback, if there was a discussion
exactly,
happening,
exactly.
I would have been like, all right, but there is no discussion happening.
It's the
Nobody
conversation.
mum's the
What
vote.
do you mean,
Nobody.
Sean? Sean, what do
And
you
I
mean
think what
that
is
there was no
most
discussion? What do you
Sorry,
mean,
say that again.
Sean? What do you mean there was no discussion?
Ask
Mhm.
Erica. Erica, is there a discussion about these
there's no
names in code?
discussion, I think, in the space because as I was telling Sean when I saw it, this is the Marriott. Is the Marriott, right? An
It's a franchise of
international
mine.
range of hotels. You're telling me that nobody from the Marriott, yeah, or nobody from here, because you know you have all of these levels that you go through before things are written up and the whole thing is set. You mean nobody in there understood that they were raising the indigenous peoples, you're raising Africans who build this country, you're raising the indentures who came after. the Scots and the whoever else and the Indians and whoever else. All of those people we raised because sugar gave prosperity to this country. The merchants, they're the only, and you know what makes it worse? The uniform that these people wearing is the uniform of the merchants. And it's like it is mind-boggling that there's nobody, and then the newspaper publishes it. You mean there's nobody at all of these levels to say, let's put a caveat here. Let's talk about some bits and pieces that are missing. We have real work to do. And then there's no uproar discussion around it. I'm overreacting.
All the time, though. This happens all the time.
Yeah. But for me, it's all in levels. So I had to stop and breathe. Yeah. Collect myself and say, you're overreacting. Just kind of breathe.
No, I don't think you are overreacting. I think other people might be underreacting, right? Like where it doesn't hit home as much for other people. But that's not your fault. Like that they don't have not accessed the information the way that people on this call could all hear the story and all collectively clutch our pearls like they did once. Like it's the information, and that's part of the resistance. We've talked about it already. Part of the resistance is dance and our traditions. Part of the resistance is language. Part of the resistance is education. And we've all, just on this call alone, are strategically placed in a way that you can contribute to that resistance, but making sure that you're intentional about it and loud about it, and you take up space about it, and not be in the corner, silently shaking and trying to figure things out, but like collectively coming together. Like Alabe was saying, in conversations just like this, just talking, having the conversation.
Yeah.
Had they got on a little Zoom call and had a chat about the names of this establishment, maybe it wouldn't have happened.
And it's not too late to change it either.
No,
I
it's not
definitely
too late.
agree. I definitely agree. I share that sentiment where you say that education.
You are not only the smart people here.
Resistance here. Yeah. Just staying true to it. We're saying that we have all of these cultural aspects that are used as an active form of resistance, but education is the umbrella for it all. This is the driving force. This discussion by itself is educating so much people on the things that they may not have been aware of before. I've even been enlightened at some point in time that in England, a lot of schools actually teach students that, the blacks were begging to be saved. They were so savage and they needed that kind of redemption. And just being here and having this conversation is enough for me to know that there are people willing to have that resistance, to drive that resistance forward. So I definitely agree with where you all are coming from.
Absolutely.
The conversations
We
have
have
to
work to
happen.
do.
And I like John's thing that it's not too late to say something about it and put up some protest against it.
Breaks.
John, not even in Barbados, but
No, we had incidents like that where people would like
Really?
call something the monkeys or monkey lounge, and they don't last. The people don't go. It's not too late.
Yeah, I think the awareness has to be built here so people will know that, you know what, you don't have to go, or you could write something or say something. Yeah.
The couple Chinese that I spoke to about it were not aware of them.
Sorry, Dom,
a lot of people have a lot of things to unlearn as well. People have a lot of things to unlearn when it comes to what we have, basically integrated into our lives through colonialism and things like that.
And education.
With these different forms of resistance, yes, with education, we definitely building back our cultural identity. We definitely, getting back to our roots, basically embedding ourselves back into that soil.
Yeah.
But to take on that radical stance or that militaristic stance, we should expect that a country that wants to recolonize, especially people who hold those and protect those elite spaces, would want children to think that we all came across the boat together. I know I teach children every year, and they thought that we came on a
cruise ship,
on a liner classes. They didn't understand So you have to like, I have to decide to teach from that perspective, everything I do, because I'm going to be spending half of my time um, unpacking or taking off those blinds. And it is in the interest of people in government or people with merchants for us to remain docile. I think that somebody else is going to take up the fight because that's how they function in the past. So what
Yep.
do we have to lose? Like you said.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I
That is
want now. Go ahead, Alabe. Sorry.
no. It's for me. It's very fruitful, very fruitful. This kind of conversation. I have many courageous to do all of the kind of things that I'm doing now. I know Sean some years ago, and she know and he tries he all the times was very having many compromise with this kind of thing about black people and all of these kind of things. He had a very a great connection with the African culture in roots here in Brazil, in Salvador, and was very interesting. I had been in Trinidad Tobago. I had in Trinidad Tobago 10 years ago, and I also was in the other islands of the Caribbean, and I identify the unity of our African roots. Like what I said, I understand in Suriname or Barbados or other places like have many things that they do there that it is many it is very similar. It's very
Similar.
similar to what's happening in Brazil and other things like I'm very interested to understand how like the language like Yoruba or language like Fon, it is not a language to impose or a language to colonize some things, and was spread for the Caribbean and the Latin America and Brazil. If you go to Colombia, if you go to Panama, you in the rituals you will understand this kind of this kind of language that now it's speaking.
Hmm.
It's a quite of language speaking in Nigeria, in Benin, in Togo,
Hmm.
in Ghana, and I say how we can resist and keep the unity very separate with that. And
Hmm.
now I'm working with an organization here in Brazil that tried that they give to me a mission to like Alabe. You understand it, this kind of connection, that this kind of international connection. Try to speak with them to connect better to better with this kind of international connection of black people in the world, even in Africa, even in Caribbean, because we have our diversity, but we are the same people. Like
Hmm.
we are the same people, and if we are the same people, let's try to know each other, the fights and the specificities of the other to resist ensemble no
Hmm.
together. Sorry,
Mm-hmm.
Together,
Mm-hmm.
together.
Mm-hmm.
As long
Ensemble.
as French.
we
We
depend
multilingual.
We understood. We understood. It doesn't matter. You don't have to criticize.
to to do this kind of thing together. I'm very
Definitely.
grateful for all of you, and I mean speak with Trinidad Tobago. It's a kind of I think I feeling a quite pride of that. I'm feeling like a quite of I'm feeling like Trinidad Tobago too. I was to Trinidad Tobago to try to to learn English, but I couldn't. I have to insert myself in the deep culture of Trinidad and Tobago to understand better about Trini. I forgot the British English that they teach there.
Yeah, here he was
And
partying too much and enjoying carnival too much to study the people English. That's what it is.
That's beautiful.
It's all right.
That's a beautiful
I
story.
also I also fell in love with a girl from Martinica also.
Yeah,
Ay,
yeah,
ay,
yeah.
And
ay.
I learned French. It was important because I when
He
I
come to
returned to
study
Brazil,
English and start to learn French instead. You see the
when I
deepening of
returned
the
to
That's a
Brazil,
story of,
international
that's a story of
connection.
courage right there.
but when I returned to Brazil, geez, I speak French. I speak French fluently, and the embassy of France say, I you can hire me, and okay, like it's a quite of thing that we can do and make connection with everybody. It's
Definitely,
we are very
Alawi.
black people
Definitely.
in Africa.
We are the same people. I like that, Alawi. We are the same people.
Yeah,
And so we're coming to the end of the conversation. But before we do that, I want to share with
of
our
course.
audiences two lovely pieces of art that were shared with us by two artists here in Trinidad, and then to get some takes from our conversation members before we wrap up. So, Kiran, if you could just throw one up, and I'll just tell the audience what the painting is meant to be about. All right, folks, this painting is entitled Transatlantic. It's a painting that is done in acrylic and collage on canvas, 36 by 24, and is done by an artist here in Trinidad called Adeline Gregoire. Um, Adeline says, in reading about the transatlantic slave trade and intergenerational trauma or memory a few years ago, I came across the Arc of Return by architect Rodney Leon, which has served as inspiration for this work. Questions such as what do I know of Africa? What do I even know of the African diaspora? Besides slave ships, African musical legacies, shackles, stories of ultra-violence and oppression, what do we know of each other? And how are we rewriting our own past, present, future? Today, I want to know and I don't want to forget. So we give thanks, we're grateful to Adeline for making this work available for us to share with everyone. This is her interpretation, what she was inspired to create when she thought about the transatlantic journeys that our ancestors made. Thank you, Adeline.
Thank
Kieran, the
you.
next one. And this one is by a colleague of mine in cultural studies. Her name is Tessa Alexander. It's entitled In Memory of Those Who Chose the Sea. And this installation pays tribute to those who, in one way or another, chose the sea, exerting, even in the most difficult of circumstances, agency. Archive images and documents were first transferred onto the blocks of watercolor paper, which was then painted and scrubbed to reveal the image underneath. Choosing the sea not only refers to those who jumped. Um, Sorry about that. Choosing the sea not only refers to those who jumped overboard slave ships, walked back into the sea, as in the Igbo landing, or jumped off cliffs to escape enslavement, but also those who came across the Kalapani, even those who set sail post emancipation, such as the Windrush. This piece, therefore, speaks of the history of the Caribbean through the sea. Yeah. Thanks, Kieran. So, final thoughts and anything that these paintings might have brought up for you guys. I'll call roll. We'll start with Whitney.
See, let's see what
Sorry.
happened. I was paying attention though,
No, you don't have to talk about the paintings. Only if they
no,
inspired something. But
I will talk about the paintings because, of course, art elicits a response, and I think it's an important aspect of again resistance, right? Like all the
mhm,
points that we've been covering: dance, movement, language, education, now art.
yes,
The first one I was looking at it, and I immediately thought of like the ocean and but the things inside of it, right? Like the remnants that exist in the ocean, like it's a grave for some of our ancestors. Um, and then the other one, like the idea of the interconnection of where the passage, right? Wherever that took us, wherever we landed, wherever we were dropped off first, whatever that may be, the ocean connects us, and that there's something about the islands in particular that is always so lovely for me and very comforting. As a first generation American, there was something about the pride of my blackness in Trinidad versus the pride of my blackness in America for mainly personal reasons, but the imagery brought me to that understanding of that interconnection, and there was like a
Mhm.
soothing quality about it despite the parts of the story that it represents.
Thank you. Dawn Marie?
I actually found the second piece to be quite interesting. That caught my attention the most, mainly because I see that it connotes that they've been buried under there. There's so, and it does denote as well that they've actually been down there. A lot of the people have been into the water. They've drowned themselves to get away from whatever fate they thought they were going to meet. And that piece it really resonated with me because you could see these figures inside of there. You could see all the people under the water, under the water, and it really holds a really strong meaning. I really appreciate that piece. Who did that piece?
Tessa Alexander.
Can you remind me, please?
Tessa Alexander.
Tessa Alexander. That was
Mhm.
great. Yes, I really like. I really resonated with that piece.
Great. Thank you. Alabe.
Thank you. I will do just a kidding. We'll sell this paint in NFT
Alabe, you
with
can't sell the
NFT.
people paintings without their permission. They didn't give us to sell, they just gave us to show. But I will tell them
Just
that
a
they
kidding,
should
just a kidding,
convert
just
it.
a kidding.
I know. I will tell them that they should convert it into NFTs. I will. But what are your final thoughts? Any final thoughts about this theme of stories of courage, and the resistance to slavery and unity against racism? John.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I also was very intrigued by the images. I mean, it did fit in with the theme stories of courage very well because there were so many layers and so many layers of, like people said, like ancestors who did not make it across the waters, or who, when they got to the points of departure, like the acronym suggests that these are stories on the shores, and that and the fact that the images look very alive gives us a sense that death is not the end, that there is something else, something that we can hope for in this facing and looking back and this reconnecting, if we are able to face these stories with courage and just allow the stories to speak, and maybe to notice places where, when we do feel enraged or we do feel impassioned, that is actually our ancestors speaking through us, giving us the backing to speak our truth and to speak the truth of their truth, and to hopefully bring a community together. I did like the idea earlier today when Erica talked about, what I call lamentations, because the whole conversation, just, I feel I need to go on ball for a couple of hours after, just
Yeah.
the weight of the energy of what would have happened to our ancestors in this moment, and that the collective does offer these ritual spaces where we can, in talking about them and addressing it and giving it voice, really tap into that emotion, to release, to heal from it, so that we can be empowered and to move as we should, in connection and in alignment with what our purpose is and what their purpose was for coming. Because clearly, our ancestors didn't, in my mind, didn't easily succumb. They weren't victims. They figured out how to persist. They figured out how to survive. They figured out how to retain, so that we are here. And then, why are we here? What is our purpose here? How do we then bring back balance, bring back orality, bring back a sense of justice to this whole situation? So I'm encouraged by this conversation. I'm encouraged by those images. I'm encouraged by meeting all of you, and I'm hoping that this conversation continues.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, John. And Erica.
Yes, I want to read a piece of something, but John, whenever you're ready, come. We're going to have an in-person session where we're going to dance and wail and drum and do all of the things we need to do. Whitney, come to it. Alabe will be
Listen,
here. So
I'm
just
coming. I'm coming summertime.
making it
I'm
happen because
coming.
I think that's important for us to just
Yes.
feel each other, feel the energy, let it work for us so we are
Yeah.
stronger for doing the work we have to do.
Yes.
Yes.
So I want to read a bit from the Book of Negroes again, because when I saw the paintings, I was looking through for something to read, and this was piece of it. Do not trust large bodies of water and do not cross them. If you, dear reader, have an African hue and find yourself led toward water with vanishing shores, seize your freedom by any means necessary and cultivate distrust of the color pink. Pink is taken as the color of innocence, the color of childhood. But as it spills across the water in the light of the dying sun, do not fall into its pretty path. There, right underneath, lies a bottomless graveyard of children, mothers, and men. I shudder to imagine all the Africans rocking in the deep. Every time I have sailed the seas, I have had the sense of gliding over the unburied. And we are here. We are
Thank,
here.
thank you for
We
that,
are
Art.
here.
We are here, definitely. I want to
I
thank you
think
all
Whitney
for.
wants to say something.
I
Oh,
do.
Whitney, you want to
I'm
say something?
also trying to. My friend
Nah,
Felina
you
always
go,
says,
Whitney. We don't hold back
no, my
here.
friend Felina always says, Whitney, bridle your tongue, bridle your tongue.
No, go
No,
ahead.
I was
no.
thinking
Sure.
about what John was saying about the heaviness of the conversation, and
Mhm.
I spread that heaviness. I take it back to the people who are responsible for the heaviness. I make sure that they know that we're meeting too. We're meeting too. We're discussing as well. Don't you worry. There's a counter happening here. I spread that heaviness around, remind them of what their ancestors were up to as well. It wasn't just ours.
Yeah.
My
This is
my
not our history, eh? This is not
uh,
our history. Yeah, we have to remember that too.
Yeah.
my last thoughts is about that, and also about the reflection about the paint. It's about here in Brazil. I don't know in the other culture. I like the sea and the ocean. It's very important to us, uh, because it's also a divinity. Have two divinities very important here, like Yaomoja, né,
Yep.
that we call like the mother who their children is fish, né? That's this is the meaning of Iemanjá, né?
Amen.
Like in the Western Africa, it's called Mamiwata, né? Like Mamiwata, né? And also Olokun, that's the god of the ocean, like the deep ocean that they has there. And also this mean healthy, richness, and also that's mean. And I can finish with that, like with a song that we call here, and that's very touchable about Iemanjá. That's in Yoruba, and it's called like that. Iemanjá boa yo, ya ya. Iemanjá boa yo, ya ya. Iemanjá Ogum, Kosi Iemanjaro yo, Euromia Xalereu. Iemanjara boa yo, ya ya. This song represents like the way of the Yemanja. It's a quite of the waves and the rhythm. of the movements of the like the divinity dance is the arms like the waves go and back in the tide like this is the meanings of these songs of it represents Iemanjá like that.
Ashe,
Ashish,
Ashe.
thank you,
Ashe,
Oliver.
Ashe.
Wow. Um, I want to just, on behalf of the Black Consciousness Festival, thank you all for saying yes, for giving your time, your thoughts, your emotions, your heart, your courage, for being a part of this conversation. And so we thank all those who tuned in as well to partake in this special day with us to remember. Yeah, to remember. And I want to end today's conversation with another quote that goes, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the judgment that something else is more important than fear." Yeah, we need to keep that. That's our focus. What is more important than fear? So I want to
Ashe.
thank everybody again and
Ashe. Thank you.
enjoy
Thank
the
Thank you,
you.
rest of your
John,
night.
Alabi, Dawn Marie. Thank you, Sean, for leading
Obrigado,
us in
John.
this.
Obrigado,
Thank you,
Dom,
Nikki,
Erika,
Oliver.
Ashton, Whitney, Amanda, e
Yes.
Sean Samad. Obrigado, muito obrigado mesmo.
Obrigada, Alabi.
We want to say thanks to Kieran, who is you
Thank
guys
you.
can't see Kieran, but Kieran is keeping us
E
running.
Kieron, obrigado, obrigado. Kieron, thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
Kieran
this.
is our wizard in Oz, man.
Yeah,
Behind the curtain.
Looking forward to more of these conversations. Thank
Definitely.
you.
Good night, all, and take care.
good night, take
Good night.
care.
Take care. Have a great
Bye.
weekend.